So something I've been talking a lot about on my channel in the last couple months is what I call the new diplomatic revolution. That is that the whole Ukraine conflict has led to the US adopting such a obstinate and stringent foreign policy where they're more or less using sanctions against anybody or diplomatic pressure against anybody who doesn't go fully on board with their anti-Russia program, despite America not actually being at war with Russia, and despite none of these countries having any actual interest in the conflict. And they will just go and threaten them and demand they give weapons to Zelensky, and they'll sanction them if they don't, or they'll go after them on the international stage. And Biden is just completely incapable of getting along with anybody or showing any kind of sensitivity or compromise. And like we had that whole thing with the him getting ghosted for 6 months by Xi, and then immediately screwing it up when he got a meeting by calling Xi a dictator and talking about how he blew him out, how he felt at him on the whole balloon thing and stuff like that. So the US is, I think, at like, this might be the lowest they've been in terms of their diplomatic standing, at least since the mid 2000s with Bush, because people really hate them at the moment, and people think Biden's like retarded, and that there's some prairie dogs, and that yeah, basically the whole thing is just a complete and total disaster. So they're looking at other countries for leadership, countries that are more willing to do business, more willing to make deals, more willing to acknowledge the interests of other parties. Now, this includes primarily China and Russia, but obviously the rest of the BRICS core membership, India, Brazil, and South Africa, much less South Africa than the others. And what you're seeing is a whole bunch of countries, including some that were historically fairly closely allied to the US, are now saying we're going to join BRICS. Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Pakistan is not, I don't think has applied yet, but they said they're going to apply. Indonesia, Bangladesh, a number of other countries are all trying to join the BRICS. And probably by the end of it, it's going to be like, I don't know, 60-70% of the world's population or more, if all the countries who say they're going to join are going to join. And that is a pretty big bloc. And the US just seems completely incapable of like even addressing this or trying to engage with this. I'm not saying the US has to like join the BRICS or something, but if you look at the statements that like Yellen makes and that what's his name, the other officials say, they just are very dismissive. They insult the BRICS. They say it's like a nothing burger. They say it's a joke, and stuff like that. And is the BRICS going to be like this global alliance that's very tight and is going to solve all the third world's problems and is going to bring the US down at long last? Maybe. I kind of doubt it though, because there's so many international organizations. Like, there's like, I don't know, like 5 for North America. There's like La Francophonie, the Commonwealth. We have NAFTA. We have NATO. We have what else is there? NORAD. There's the non-aligned movement. There's the Shanghai Cooperation. There's the Belt and Road. There's just so many initiatives and so many organizations that don't seem to like ever be really decisive. So is BRICS going to be the one that changes the world? I don't know, but sometimes it's more important when it comes to international relations. Appearance is everything. Reputation is everything. And at the moment, things are not looking good for the US. You have basically everyone jumping on board with Russia and China. And the US did a lot of damage to themselves, stealing Russia's assets, forcing other countries to seize Russia's assets when they're not at war with Russia, was a big issue. Kicking Russia off of SWIFT when they're not at war with Russia is a big issue, because it's kind of open Pandora's box. every country now is worried that if they do something the US doesn't want them to do, they will get kicked off of SWIFT, they will get de-dollarized. Like, the situation that happened was Russia had to default on part of its debt, despite having massive foreign reserves, because they weren't allowed to pay in dollars. So, because they weren't allowed to pay in dollars, they like it was I think it was only like $50 million, but they couldn't pay it back, so they like defaulted because they weren't allowed to pay in dollars and they weren't allowed to transfer the money. So like the US's plan was, okay, Russia's gonna default because we're literally not gonna let them pay a loan off, and that was their genius plan. And I think everybody's like, well, what if we don't want to legalize gay marriage? What if we don't want unlimited access to abortion? What if we don't want to disestablish our state religion or do any number of other things? Then the U.S. is going to kick us off of SWIFT, and our economy is going to collapse, and we aren't going to be able to make debt payments, and it's just a disaster. And that threat is hanging over everybody like the sword of Damocles. You also have the whole thing where they forced Switzerland to turn over like all the information on the Russian depositors' banking info. So now Switzerland is no longer like a neutral country. They violated their neutrality to give the Russian assets over, and I don't know. And then you also have like the whole Nord Stream thing that is pretty obvious that the U.S. knew about and was complicit in, where they blew up Germany's pipeline. You had them calling for regime change in Turkey. Like, there's just so many. They screwed it up with just about everybody at this point in time. So you have this new global leadership. You have people joining the BRICS like crazy. If nothing else, it is a sign that a lot of people are very dissatisfied with the current state of American hegemony. And they want something new. They want a multipolar world. And the new meme that they're coming up with is we're going to have a BRICS currency, and it's going to be backed by gold. It kind of sounds like we're going to build a wall, and Mexico is going to pay for it, or something to that effect. Is this actually going to happen? I don't know. I kind of doubt it. The mechanics of a whole bunch of different countries that aren't as like closely related and closely geographically and developmentally together as the EU, developing a common currency just seems like a really difficult prospect. Like, who's going to print it? Who's going to control it? There's who's going to print it, who's going to control it, how are they going to get all the gold together, where is the gold going to be stored? I guess they can distribute it between the various members. But if any of them have the ability to print money, then there's a temptation to do that, especially since a lot of these countries can be pretty irresponsible when it comes to it. I mean, the U.S. is too, but the U.S. has not yet had the degree of hyperinflation that Zimbabwe or South Africa or Argentina has had. At least not yet. There's also the issue of are Western countries and non-BRICS countries going to accept this currency. I think the idea is going to be that subnational business is going to be continued to be dealt with in national currencies, and trade between states is going to be done in the BRICS currency, whatever they decide to call it, and the BRICS currency is going to, because it's tied to gold, it will have a consistent value, kind of like how the US dollar has a consistent value based on the price of oil. But you are seeing increasingly more and more, even if the BRICS currency doesn't come about, de-dollarization, where countries are conducting business deals in renminbi or national currencies like rupees or rubles, or payments in kind like oil or gold or something like that, as opposed to in USD. And obviously this is not a majority of the world's trade, and it might be decades until this is the majority of the world's trade. But if you like see the Biden team talking about it, they have zero concern. They're like, we're not going to engage with the BRICS. We're not going to talk to them. We're not going to address their concerns. We're not going to try to come to some sort of understanding or some sort of deal. We're just going to try to use the dollar to force them to do what we want them to do. And once again, I hope people don't think I'm a China show or something like that. But I'm just trying to be like real here. Trying to be realistic. At the end of the day, it's better to negotiate before things get really bad. It's better to negotiate while you're still relatively strong and you have something to bring to the table than wait till you're weak and all your enemies have their knives out. So I think it's time maybe the U.S. needs to establish ties with BRICS, start coming up with some trade agreements with them, some diplomatic agreements, acknowledge the concerns of the various parties involved, and try to de-escalate. That doesn't mean they have to give up on all their friends. It doesn't mean they have to give up on their national interest. But it does mean you have to acknowledge basic realities. That there are other major players in the world, and that you've alienated basically everybody. Also that Europe is just a complete and utter disaster at the moment, militarily speaking. And NATO is basically just America. I mean, it always kind of was, and the U.S. doesn't have the weapons really to fight a war. So it's just my frustration. It's just like what the U.S. needs to do is adopt even a little bit of pragmatism. Like, start cutting deals. You don't have to take bad deals. You don't have to like cower and beg and stuff. But if you don't start thinking about these things while you have resources or you have an advantage, then when you have to crawl to them and try to come up with an agreement, it's just not going to work. It's just going to be one giant mess. But the U.S. doesn't care about that. Biden doesn't care about that because they humiliated, they fell to China with the balloon nonsense. So it's just all going to work out somehow. It's all going to work out. Everyone's going to do what they tell them to do. They're winning the war in Ukraine. Russia is completely blown out. Everything's just going great, and that is the U.S. attitude towards the whole thing, and it is delusional, and it is crazy, and they won't course correct. But maybe if Trump comes to power, they will. And people seem to think that I think Trump is some messianic figure, and I don't. But I do think he is more rational when it comes to these things, and I think he understands at least business. That you have to do to make deals with these people. You have to try to figure out what they want. You have to make some sort of concessions. If for no other reason than your opponents need to save face. They need to make it look like they got something out of the deal too, that they didn't get completely blown out. You have to give them an opportunity to save face and make it look like it was a success, even if you got the best of it. But Biden doesn't understand these things. The people around him don't understand these things. They're just arrogant, and nobody likes someone who's an arrogant dick, who just demands that they have their way all the time like a spoiled child. And that's what Biden's like, and that's what the U.S. is like. And will BRICS last? Will it become a major alliance to counter the U.S.? Maybe, maybe not. But sometimes the exact details don't matter, and sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees, as it were. So those are my thoughts on the matter. I hope you enjoyed looking at the cute prairie dogs. God bless, and more content to come.